All right, welcome to today's webinar. We're going to be starting with coffee and compliance today. Today we're going to be talking about why your environmental data should really be in one place and talking about what that means and some of the challenges that folks have with getting all their data actually in one place, especially around environmental data, but this can be more broadly applicable to like safety data, just general compliance data. So we're going to be talking about environmental data today. And there's a couple of things that we want to touch on. So number one is just what do we do? And obviously I'm biased. I think you should be using software to get all this environmental data into one place, because I think there's a lot of benefits from an efficiency and automation, especially as we think about like headcounts and budgets. How do you get all your data in one place effectively? And there's a couple trends we see with like regulations. Everybody knows it in terms of environmental regulations, they're not getting any easier. And yet for most folks, they're being pressured to cut spending, do more with like less headcount. So one of the ways you can do that is with software. So I'm one of the co-founders here at Mapistry, and obviously I think that software and Mapistry software is the easiest way to actually do all your environmental compliance and the data collection, to track it, to analyze it, to report out on it, to share it. All the great benefits that you get with environmental software is what we're trying to do around environmental regulations and helping environmental teams manage the ever-increasing workload. So a couple of reasons, if we look at like environmental data and answer the question is like, why should it be in one place? Why is it a problem today, which I'll get to, but like if we get it all in one place, we achieve that. But why? One is just compliance assurance. If you can see the full data set, you actually know if you're in compliance or out of compliance. One, there's also an operational efficiency. You're not sending a spreadsheet version 2.3, don't use, outdated, back and forth. If it's all in a central system, there's incredible operational efficiencies, and even operational efficiencies for the environmental team, but also operations teams if we're thinking about like industrial companies. And then the final piece, and I think the most powerful for anybody in their role, is really the decision making. If I can see truly everything in one place, and what I mean by that is I can see the map of my site, I understand where my potential pollutant sources are, whether they may be an air source or a discharge point or my activities. And I have my inspection records, and I can actually tie those to those pollutant sources or my activities. And then I've got the air and water data. That's a really powerful data set for decision making, and to see it visually and to be able to pull up an inspection form or look at trends for discharges and tie all of that together. Today, that doesn't often happen outside of like a software platform, because you're looking at spreadsheets, you may have inspection records in a binder at a site. So you don't have that data set all tied together to really make intelligent decisions. You're often making decisions based on part of that. You might get a spreadsheet that just has the latest sample results that somebody took days to enter, but you don't have the last 6 months of inspection records to know that somebody was just pencil whipping them. That's the kind of insights that you really want for decision making, because the decision may not be to put in a treatment system, it may be to retrain our staff on what good housekeeping looks like. But we can't tell that if we don't actually have that data set. So the problem today for environmental teams and operational teams and anybody running a business is when we look at the environmental sector for industrial companies, one, non-compliance is costly. It's only getting more expensive. And those costs could be a fine, an NOV, a lawsuit, but it could just be time costs, resource costs of like spending time dealing with an inspector on site. I'm going to get back to the middle one because that's kind of the focus of our discussion today on coffee and compliance. But the other thing is time and money. Like, we don't have infinite time to punch numbers in to a spreadsheet to actually look at it. We don't have infinite resources for every treatment system we want or every system. And that's a big part, software system buying to centralize our environmental data. It's not free, we're a business, but we can show that ROI of that investment in a software system and what you get back, because money is limited and you can't just hire people, pay them to travel, keep dumping more environmental requirements on operations folks. The biggest thing is that the central one is data is siloed and disconnected. And one of the things I want to talk about is what are the challenges today around that? Is why is it siloed? Why is it disconnected? Because that doesn't give you visibility. and a couple of these data challenges that we see kind of environmental leaders dealing with really tie back to the data problem. The time to manually enter and truly have that full data set, like that's a very manual process oftentimes today. It's all disconnected. It may sit at a plant level, it may sit at an area level. If you're talking nationally or globally, do you really have complete visibility into your data? The answer is probably not today. You've got more data collection requirements and there's more risk, but then you're relying on that mix of tools. And that's where one of the big challenges is how do you tie it all together? You might have like a cheap inspection app you're doing part of it on, you're using Excel for another part, you're doing a lot on paper, you're using CAD for your mapping systems or your plant maps. How do you tie it all together? Because all of this it ends up being a mix. So what we want to talk about is, why does data end up siloed? And some of that is, in industrial operations, there's a history of mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes you're allowing different business units to use their own tools, to pick their own systems, even down to a plant level. I'm a plant manager, I want to use this tool, I have complete freedom on my plant budget, I'm going to use it. That creates data silos oftentimes, and that can create that disconnection. So there's not a consistent way of collecting it. So when we talk about data, and before I go too deep in it, is like there's quantitative data, so number of incidents on the safety side, but the lab data, the sampling data, air emissions. So if I'm running production on ink or paint usage and I want to know my VOCs, all that's my quantitative data. And then I've got my qualitative, my photos, my observations, my inspection records. When we say getting all your environmental data in one place, it doesn't mean just did I collect an inspection? It's actually field level data of what tank was inspected, when was it, who did it, what was the common problem, because then we can extract that and really understand it. So some of the common data collection problems we see, and this creates that data silos, data disconnections, is paper records are really hard to access at all, let alone extract that granularity. So if I'm doing an SPCC inspection and I have it on a paper record, and I look at the tank and it's a 50,000 gallon AST, and I want to understand what my most common problems come up in inspections, I've got to probably go to the site, take out the big 3-ring binder, scan it in, collect all of that, come back, and then manually enter all those problems in. From a data collection standpoint, not only do I not readily have a copy of that inspection, but I don't even have at best I can scan it in and I've got a copy and I can look at it. But can you imagine flipping through every single inspection, monthlies, over hundreds of facilities, even over multiple years, to understand why do we have SPCC or fuel tank issues, and where can we invest in improving that? That's going to be a very manual process. If we can extract the field level data from those inspections, which we can do in a software system, we can actually not only collect the data better, but we can analyze it better. So one of the big things is this last bullet is there's a huge opportunity cost. If I'm going out to a site, scanning paper records and then flipping through them, that's a massive opportunity cost for some of your most well-paid, highly trained, highly skilled people in a company. An environmental manager is expected to run one either really massive plant or lots of less complex plants. They should be spending time on higher value issues and problem solving and thinking proactively of how do I not ever get a violation, or how do I make it more efficient for my operations teams, because I'm a business partner. As environmental, I'm a business partner to operations. How do I make it more efficient for them? Those are the high value activities that I think all of us want to be spending the time on, not how do I better scan and collect data. So this couple examples, just the amount of data we're collecting, even if we're printing it out, collecting it, scanning it back in, how do we make this more efficient, and how do we just track it better? So this is the kind of common toolkit that I think I started out my career with, of I use Excel a lot, some paper forms, got to print them out. I have my clipboard. I remember buying the first thing when I started in environmental consulting was they said you got to buy a really good clipboard because you're going to have lots of forms to fill out, and you got to keep them dry because it's raining. I was doing groundwater sampling and I had a lot of well logs to fill out. So getting a metal, durable, clipboard that I could put it in, and I had a piece of plastic over the paper sheet to keep the rain off of it. That was my data collection tools. It still works, but then I'd come back to the office and spend just as much time as I did in the field punching it into a spreadsheet, and then scanning it in. So, it's twice as much time, maybe 3 times as much time to actually collect that data. So this is an example of a customer, 15,000 plus inspection points. When their operations team saw this, they're like, oh, that's what you do, is you collect this data, you centralize it for us. I didn't know that. I think one of the cool things is, as people have implemented software systems, is it's highlighted to other parts of the company of like, I didn't even know the magnitude of the environmental data collection problem that you deal with every day. And I think when that goes off, it's like, oh, I get it. $10,000 a year for a piece of software, $100,000 for software across hundreds of facilities. That makes sense. That's a massive problem. But if people don't know about it, they don't really understand. I mean, for some environmental managers, it's like, this is great. Now I have justification, like, because there's often people that'll be like, what do you do all day? It's dealing with this. It's keeping companies in compliance, it's collecting this data, it's analyzing it, it's tracking it, sharing it, and it's actually a complex process. And it's tough to quantify that if it's kind of disconnected, spread all over the place. So this is the example, the red center regional manager. If there's EHS folks on the webinar today, you can understand just like everything coming at you that you're trying to triage, move around, share, create PowerPoints for a VPGM presentation on like, what are we dealing with? How do I extract this report for sustainability reporting? It's just a massive onslaught of data. So let's go into options on like, how do we solve this problem? I mean, hopefully the why in one place from a decision-making, a compliance assurance, and operational efficiency are very clear. But what are the options? Because software isn't the only option out there. So we put together a matrix of like, what are my options? If I'm going to say my goal is to get all my environmental data in one place. One, it can be physical, it can be paper. I can scan it in, I can collect all of it, I can have giant file cabinets, I can truly centralize it so I have access to it, so I can flip through it, look at it, make decisions. It could be in Excel. That's a common one. G Sheets or Excel is, even if I'm collecting stuff in inspections, doing water samples, I still want to centralize it into some sort of spreadsheet. That tends to break once it starts becoming a data entry problem. The data input output can be very, very clunky. And that's usually where we see the decrease. And then there's version control issues, even on a shared drive and all. Shared forms docs, we see less of this. We often, years ago, we saw more people kind of hacking it together, like creating a Google form that pushed it to a G Sheet, and then Google Doc, and trying to like link them together. To be fair, before I started Map History, that's what I did, of like, how do I make a SWIP builder and collect stormwater data? And I used Google tools to tie them all together. But I personally quickly found out, about 10 years ago, how that failed. Is it's just not very scalable, and it's very clunky to maintain and like make a streamlined process. So I mean, that's where I am today in terms of like really being an advocate for environmental software and like centralizing it in a single system. So how do we do that, and like what are the realm of possibilities? Because one of the cool things I think of, if we truly go in with the idea of like getting all our environmental data in one place, is it opens up all these opportunities to think about, like, if I truly could connect into any data source in my company, what would be valuable from a compliance assurance, a decision making, an analysis standpoint. And that could be production data, it could be fuel usage, it could be runtime hours. If we're using like historians or Pi, how do I extract data from that? And then actually aggregate it, and then be able to ask questions around that. Is like, why are we seeing VOC emissions creep up every other week? Maybe it's a production thing, maybe I'm doing something else. Maybe it's how I'm changing out my equipment. Can I tie into other systems? So one of the cool things is when we go in with the idea of data in one place, the other mindset to have is like, how far can we go? Where are the limits of that? Because one of the things from a software perspective, and you'll see this API, but a couple of ways we've set it up so that we can take any kind of like Excel or CSV file. So if you can extract it from a system, we can get it into our system, but the API will do that automatically through direct integrations. So when we think really big on like environmental data collection, it's where I push people is like, what else? Let's push those limits of data collection for the environmental team, because it'll make you much more powerful from an analytics side and a decision making and that proactive part of like being able to be very valuable as a business partner to the operations teams. So a couple benefits here. One, automated data collection, consistent data. So from a software perspective, if you're trying to get your environmental data all in one place, you want it automated as much as possible to bring down the workload and the efficiency. One of the big reasons we're doing this is to automate it. One is consistency. You're not getting like fat fingers. I punch numbers in wrong all the time if I'm doing manual entry. Being able to get that consistent data capture and that really efficient calculations that can run. We're not having to go build those every time. We're not trying to have every site build their own calculations. You can get very standardized, have templates, have like central resources to set up your data, and then be able to analyze it all the same way and justify it. You know, if you're making justifications for environmental engineering purposes, having that in a centralized format can be really powerful, because then you can share that knowledge throughout your sites. And then kind of the sky's the limit on like, how do you share it? How do you get other users on it? We've seen some really cool stuff where customers are putting their consultant teams on it, so you can have them be more program managers and provide even more value add to you as an environmental manager than just sending them a request to write a report for you. They can be in that system real time and be able to say, hey, I'm noticing this trend. They can be an extra set of eyes and ears, or within your company, sharing dashboards monthly of like, here's where we're finding gaps. It creates a visibility like that 15,000 plus inspection points on one plant. If I'm sharing this data now, it really makes you a valuable resource and a business partner to the operation side, the production side. So how do you start? Really, it's looking at what you're doing today and thinking about how can I start getting it in a system in one place? Typically, that'll start with looking at inspection records, compliance requirements, so terms and conditions of permits, tasks. You know, it could be a 5-year review and update of an SPCC plan. It could be annual reporting. So thinking about that as a bucket, inspections as a bucket, just records. You know, I have a copy of my permit, pretty static. I want to get that in there. The other place to look is maps. I have lots of site plans for my SPCC, my stormwater. Can I not only get that in a system where it's a static image, but can I get it into a system like ours where we have a GIS map builder that I can start creating and adding and updating that data? So thinking about it in those buckets. And then the really big one is air, water, waste data, production data, all that quantitative data. How do I get that in? And that's where our team can help, is understand it. But just think about like, how many spreadsheets are you using? Are you using 50 spreadsheets to track for sustainability reporting around waste, truck trips, you know, water sample results, air emission throughput logs, production numbers, run times, fan speeds, all of that? How do we capture that? So I would break it into those 5 buckets to start. So inspections, tasks, records, mapping data, GIS data, and then all the quantitative data around air, water, waste that you might capture. And if you break it into that, then you can start thinking about how do we hook all of those up. That quantitative data piece is often the biggest because there's just so much you can collect. But one of the things you want to do and start is think about, am I going to do it via like a manual input? So rather than having an operator log on a clipboard how much paint I used, am I going to have them put it in on a web app? Or am I just going to go to a spreadsheet, you know, and have them punch it in a spreadsheet? So manual input, being able to extract that data from other systems in your company, like an export to a CSV or Excel, and then import it into a system like Mapistry. That's the other mode of input. And then the really cool one is the integrations, is how do we just automate this, get this completely out of the hands of frontline personnel or environmental teams, and just collect that data on the fly in real time. So five buckets to think about data collection in, and then think about the input modes. The same with the quantitative data that I mentioned, manual, file import, integrations. You can think about inspections the same way. Many systems, you're still going to do it on paper and you're just going to check a box. I think that's an absolute waste of time, to be honest. You can still pencil whip it. You can still just go in and click, 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 check the box. I think that's kind of pointless. Ideally, you're doing it on a mobile app, and then I can extract all the information you're collecting from that inspection form and check the tasks off, those compliance tasks off automatically. I can analyze the data you're collecting. Like, there's just so many capabilities that are possible if you're collecting on a mobile app rather than still doing it some other way and just checking a box off in a software system. So one of the big things, like we talked about, the three problem areas: non-compliance is costly, data is siloed and disconnected, and then we talk about, resources are limited, time, money. So how do you justify getting software to put it all in one place, all your environmental data? Because one of the big pushbacks you'll probably get is like, well, that's what I pay you for, or why can't we just hire another person to do that? There's not an efficiency of scale. Hiring a person, training them, keeping them at a company is really expensive. Just paying them like fully loaded cost, and then look at travel costs. And even if you have somebody, you really want to hire somebody just to go drive to a site, collect forms, enter it in a spreadsheet, you just lose so much functionality there, and you don't get that automation, that data integrations. So thinking about just that, the person cost, but some of the big drivers for like, what's the business case for centralizing all your environmental data, but more importantly is like, how do we do it efficiently? So from an operation side, we can streamline things. You can scale with growth, and then you can provide that data back for customers. So it can be helpful to sales and marketing teams to instantly be able to pull up the metrics for sustainability, rather than once a year when you do that 50 spreadsheet shuffle to get your sustainability reporting done. Can you pull that up in real time and say, this is how we're doing right now? The benefits of better data is just from a decision making. I can decide to invest in new equipment, or I can decide not to based on that data set that I have, and I have a complete data. And then I can look at like, what are my metrics of success for this in making this business case? Reduction in environmental and operational time on environmental compliance, making better decisions, mitigating and reducing fine and lawsuit risk, adding to public perception with better sustainability data, pushing the industry on what you're reporting for environmental and sustainability. These are all the metrics that I would look at for why invest in a software platform. So this is the map history pitch and what you can do around how do we view environmental data, and our goal is to get it all in one place, which is very different than other systems. Sometimes they're just tackling one problem, that may be tasks and inspections. Our goal is to truly get it into one place, and that includes things like the GIS mapping data. That's why the name Mapistry, but underlying all of this is a GIS mapping system that you can use. Integrating in to pull that data from other systems, because if you really have it in one place, then you can analyze, share it, report, manage it, all from the same spot. So the why get your environmental data in one place. It's one of the biggest goals for us, and one of the missions of the company is to get all your environmental data so you can operate more effectively and make better decisions. So with that, if anybody's got any questions before we wrap up, I'm happy to take them. You can shoot me an email too if you want to learn more about Mapistry or how we think about things from an environmental data standpoint. All right. Well, one of the questions I see coming in on pricing, like from a software standpoint, one of the things is looking at ROI and what's the business case for it. So we've got a pricing page on our website if you want to look at it. We think about things in those same 5 buckets I was talking about, and we set up our pricing tiers around that to think of. Typically people will start with like inspections, tasks, records, maps as like the starting point. It's the easiest thing. It's the one that they can get the most buy-in for right away. So if we think about from a pricing standpoint on softwares, we're going to start there. Then we'll move up to that next tier. I think there's huge opportunities here, but sometimes it takes a while for people to implement. It's one of the challenges with software is getting that user adoption. It's why our customer success team, why we've invested so much in it and why they're so great is like that user adoption, getting it set up right. But once they've done that, that second tier is really that quantitative data. So let's think about air, water, waste data and all the different formats we can get it into. And then the third tier is really when we're ready to scale and automate, is those integrations, looking at custom analytics, user security things for IT teams. That's that third tier. So we structure it to follow those 5 buckets and what people from a program maturity standpoint are ready to tackle. Oftentimes people start in that essentials tier, really looking at like tasks, inspections, record keeping as a starting point of like, I want to centralize that. Once I've done that, 6 months in, a year in, we're going to start collecting all that quantitative data. And then oftentimes we'll have the discussion of like, well, if we can automate it, that would even show a bigger ROI. And that's that third tier. All right. Well, I appreciate everybody jumping on today. Thank you very much. And we'll wrap up.